Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack what I honestly think is one of the most fascinating parts of the Indian Constitution. Today we're looking at Part 4, the Directive Principles of State Policy, or, DPSP. Now, if you've ever found yourself wondering exactly how a massive, incredibly diverse country sets its long-term goals for the welfare of its citizens, well, this is exactly where those answers live. But right off the bat, these principles present a huge mystery that we really need to unravel.
Think about it. This is a massive constitutional paradox that we're going to solve together today. Usually, if a constitutional rule gets broken, you can march straight to the Supreme Court. But the directive principles, they are non-justiciable. That means you literally cannot legally force the government to implement them. So why on earth would the framers dedicate an entire section of the Constitution to rules that a judge can't even enforce? Let's figure that out.
To demystify all this, we're going to hit 5 key areas: what DPSP actually is, how it differs from fundamental rights, the 3 main ideologies behind it, a look at some key constitutional amendments, and finally, what we call the People's Court.
All right, Section 1. What exactly is DPSP?
Let's establish what these directives are and where they came from. You can really think of them as the ultimate instruction manual for the government, and their journey is actually pretty global. Back before independence, the British used this thing called the Instrument of Instructions in the 1935 Government of India Act, which was basically a rule book for governors. When we were drafting our own constitution, the legendary advisor, Sir B.N. Rao, looked around the world. He realized, quite rightly, that a brand new developing nation just couldn't make every single right legally binding right out of the gate without completely collapsing the court system. So borrowing heavily from the 1937 Irish Constitution, which actually got the idea from Spain, these instructions were modernized into the directive principles and dropped right into Part IV of our Constitution, covering Articles 36 to 51. Looking at this, we can clearly see the massive shift from the oppressive British police state to a modern welfare state. During British rule, the state basically existed to control people, right? Arbitrary arrests, heavy taxes, absolutely zero public welfare. DSP completely flips that script. It tells the state to actively take the lead in protecting and promoting the economic and social well-being of the people. It's this beautiful shift from a state that just punishes to a state that actually nurtures.
And the crucial point here is how Dr. B.R. Ambedkar viewed these. He didn't see them as just, polite suggestions. He saw them as the moral heartbeat of governance. He actually called them a novel feature, arguing that if a government keeps these principles in mind while making laws, they literally cannot go wrong. Together with fundamental rights, they form the absolute philosophy, really the conscience of the Constitution.
Moving on to Section 2, how DPSP differs from your fundamental rights. Let's look at this vital contrast because honestly, this is what trips up so many students. If the government ignores your fundamental rights, boom, you go directly to the Supreme Court. That's what justiciable means. Fundamental rights also act as negative injunctions. They basically tell the state what it cannot do. Do not discriminate. Do not illegally arrest. They secure our political democracy. DSP, on the other hand, acts as a positive injunction. It tells the state what it should be doing to secure socioeconomic democracy. It's this active push to build hospitals, ensure equal pay, protect the environment, even if, you can't necessarily sue the state for not doing it fast enough.
All right, Section 3, the 3 ideologies of DPSP.
We can take this sprawling list of principles in Part 4 and categorize them into 3 main ideological pillars: socialistic, Gandhian, and liberal intellectual. Understanding these is like having a cheat code to instantly recognize the DNA behind almost any Indian policy. Let's break them down. First up, the socialistic principles. Under this pillar, Article 39 focuses on the equitable, not just equal, distribution of resources. Think of it like this. Imagine a parent giving gifts to their 2 kids. Giving them both the exact same remote control car is equal. But if one kid actually wanted a car and the other wanted a doll, and the parent swaps them so they each get what they genuinely need, well, that's equitable. This socialistic principle is all about preventing wealth from piling up in the hands of a few and ensuring that all citizens, men and women equally, get an adequate means of livelihood. Next, we have the Gandhian principles. This perfectly captures Mahatma Gandhi's core belief that the true India lives in its villages. He famously bypassed the elite to empower the rural masses, right? So Article 40 directs the state to organize village panchayats and empower them as units of self-government. And then there's Article 47, which directs the state to prohibit intoxicating drinks and drugs, which is exactly why you see certain states, like Gujarat and Bihar, implementing strict alcohol bans today based directly on these ideals. Finally, the liberal intellectual principles. This pillar pushes for a modern, progressive society. A great example is Article 44, which directs the state to secure a uniform civil code, essentially replacing the patchwork of different personal laws around marriage and inheritance with one uniform set of laws for everyone. Another one is Article 50, which demands the separation of the judiciary from the executive. And that makes total sense. I mean, if you get pulled over for a traffic violation, the police officer writing your ticket absolutely shouldn't be the same person sitting as the judge in your court case.
Which brings us to Section 4, Key Constitutional Amendments.
Now, the Constitution is a living document, right? It's not frozen in time. Over the decades, governments have actively updated our socioeconomic goals without us getting bogged down in endless text. Just look at this breakdown. The 42nd Amendment in '76 brought in free legal aid, making sure that if you're arrested and broke, the state has to provide a lawyer. Then the 86th Amendment in 2002 completely revolutionized education by mandating early childhood care for kids under 6, which paved the way for education to become a fundamental right. And more recently, the 97th Amendment actively promoted cooperative societies to help boost local economies. It's all about adapting to what the country needs.
And that leads us to our final section, Section 5, the People's Court.
Let's circle back and resolve that massive mystery we introduced at the very beginning of this explainer. Why write down all these amazing welfare instructions if the courts can't actually force the government to follow them? Well, simply put, a newly independent India back in 1947 just didn't have the money or the stability to guarantee these huge promises right away. Imagine forcing a brand new, financially strained country to legally guarantee equal pay, widespread pensions, and totally modernized agriculture overnight. It would have literally crashed the system. The founders were incredibly wise to leave this to future governments to implement as resources allowed. But Dr. Ambedkar brilliantly resolved this lack of legal enforcement by pointing out the ultimate sanction behind these principles. Look, critics love to call DSP a toothless tiger, but Ambedkar argued that no government relying on a popular vote can afford to ignore these directives. If a political party promises welfare in their manifesto and then totally fails to deliver on these constitutional instructions, they're going to face a tribunal that is way more powerful than the Supreme Court.
And that tribunal is you. The ultimate takeaway here is that if the government fails to uphold these instructions, they don't answer to a judge, they answer to you at the ballot box. The real power of the directive principles doesn't lie in a courtroom. It lies entirely in the awareness of the citizens, which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to ponder. When you step up to cast your next vote, are you actually judging your representatives based on how well they've brought these directive principles to life?